This is Dr. S. the Legend. He's back. Today I want to talk about the Trump ballroom issue or non-issue. My belief is whatever Donald Trump does, he gets criticized for. So let me give you some facts about the project and what's really going on. This is the demolition of the East Wing. It's not part of the historic White House. It's an annex. It's connected by a hallway. It's not being paid for by taxpayer money. Donald Trump is paying for part of it, and there's going to be donor money. It's going to be a ballroom, and it's going to seat approximately 650 people. Right now, the White House can only seat less than 100 people for any kind of state dinner, state event whatsoever. So most venues for like weddings and things of that nature in this country, they'll seat many more than 100 people. Other presidents have wanted this thing. And if the next president doesn't like it, he can change it. He can make it into a bowling alley, archery range, whatever he wants to do. And let me make this absolutely clear. The East Wing is not part of the historic White House. It's an annex connected by a hallway. It was built by Theodore Roosevelt in 1902. It presently holds offices. The office of the First Lady, for example. Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1942 added a second floor. And the reason he added a second floor was to hide what was really going on, the building of an underground bunker that was going to manage the operation of World War II. It was done in secret, and the taxpayers paid for this. This was called the bunker. It's still there right now under the East Wing. It's called the Emergency Operations Center. It is one of our nuclear command centers. It's manned by the military 24/7. So my theory is that this construction of the East Wing, yes, we need the ballroom, but we also are going to have the expansion of the bunker and bring it up to 21st century standards. There have been many changes to the White House. The historic White House in 1927, Calvin Coolidge, president, added a third floor to the White House. It was paid for by the taxpayers. In addition to the bunker built by Franklin Roosevelt, he put a swimming pool in the White House, paid for by the taxpayers. Then President Truman in 1948 gutted the entire White House because the beams in the White House were wood and they had rotted. And the White House was structurally unsound, and they had to replace the beams with steel girders, and no one could be in the White House for almost 4 years. And it was paid for by taxpayer money. By today's finances, up to $200 million this would have cost today. President Nixon, he took the pool from FDR and he made it into a press room. And he added a bowling alley into the White House. And this was again paid for by taxpayer money. This project, the construction of the ballroom, in my opinion, should only take a year and a half. And it's supposed to take 3 or 4 years. And the reason for that, in my opinion, is because they are really enlarging the underground bunker. That's what's going to take all the time to do. So it's basically 2 projects in one. The ballroom, which most presidents have wanted, and expansion of the underground bunker. Unfortunately, whatever Donald Trump does, he gets criticized for, and I'm sure he cannot say that they're going to expand the bunker underneath because it's top secret. Which brings us to the point that the Democrats have one issue, and that issue is anti-Trump. And they have forgotten about other issues that concerns the people. And this might cause the Democrats to become extinct. There's a strong possibility that even when Donald Trump is gone, they're going to be, again, anti-Trump endlessly. He's been around from 2016. He'll be in office till January 2029. And it's the opposition is anti-Trump, anti-Trump. Whatever he does is wrong. This has happened before in history. Oh my God, history repeats itself. If people would only learn their history, they would realize that there's nothing new and it all gets repeated. There was a similar political party back in the 19th century. It was called the Whigs, W-H-I-G-S. Has nothing to do with hair, nothing to do with this stuff. This is not a wig. It has nothing to do with this. And this party was opposed to Andrew Jackson, who was the president. And in many ways, he's similar to Donald Trump, a very popular president, but he had his detractors and his enemies. And they called him King Andrew. And they got their name Whigs from the English Whigs, because the English Whig political party was organized in opposition to the King of England. So you get it? King Andrew would be like the King of England. The Whigs in England are like the Whigs in the United States. And they got their name from the origin of the Whigs in England, a town called Whigamore. English have strange names. Well, we have strange names too. Again, England had a real king. And this whole No King's Day, well, it could be a repetition of King Andrew. It's really nothing original. It was started by a couple people called the Indivisibles back in 2016. I don't know who these people are. But in any case, I think this whole thing is a non-issue. Just talk briefly more about the Whigs. They were formed by Henry Clay and Daniel Webster. They were opposed to Andrew Jackson because Jackson was the first people's president. He was not an aristocrat. So the Whigs elect a president in 1841 called William Henry Harrison. Unfortunately, he was only a year in office and he died, a month. He was only president for a month. And he died and was succeeded by his vice president, John Tyler. That's 1841 to 45. And then the Whigs elected another president, Zachary Taylor. By the way, both Harrison and Taylor were both generals. Well, Taylor lasted a year and he died in office. And he was succeeded by his vice president, Millard Fillmore. And that was 1849 to 53. And by 1852, the Whigs no longer had a platform. They were so organized in opposition to Jackson that they forgot about policy issues. And both presidents they elected died in office. And the Whigs couldn't decide over the issue of slavery. The Northern Whigs were opposed to slavery. The Southern Whigs were for slavery. So basically, the party disappeared between 1852 and 1854. The Northern Whigs became the Republican Party, or joined the Republican Party, which was a new political party. And the Southern Whigs formed a political party called the Constitutional Union Party, which only existed for 1 year in 1860. So the definition of stupidity is do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. So be anti-Trump. Charge him with 4 indictments. Charge him with a civil fraud case. Try to bankrupt him. And they haven't given up. No King's Day. It's constantly anti-Trump. And the problem is that if you don't know your history, you're going to repeat your history. And you're going to not have policies anymore because you'll be so anti-King or anti-Trump that your party may become extinct. It says in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 9, Clause 8, no title of nobility shall be granted by the United States. Meaning, we don't allow royalty, we don't allow kings. Anyway, read the Declaration of Independence. It's totally devoted to a critique of the King of England. They don't even mention his name, King George III. They called him the Prince. So, just to temporarily conclude, the Democrats could be committed political suicide. Now I want to move into the issue of deportation and the law, which is the Democrats again are criticizing Donald Trump for. You have to understand the law. The Immigration and Nationality Act authorizes immigration officers to interrogate any alien or person believed to be an alien as to his right to be or remain in the United States. This is a law. 8 U.S.C. 1357A1. Immigration officers may briefly detain an individual for questioning if they have reasonable suspicion based on specific articulable facts that the person being questioned is an alien illegally in the United States. This has always been the case and always been enforced, and the Supreme Court has recently reinforced this position. We also have 8 U.S.C. 1324. It's a crime to bring an illegal alien into the United States, to transport them within the United States, and more importantly, to harbor them in the United States, like what they're doing in sanctuary cities and sanctuary states. And you can be fined anywhere between 5 and 20 years, depending on the severity of the infraction. So you have to understand the law. And states and local governments are opposing deportation. And this is highly questionable behavior because, again, we have the Constitution, Article 6, the supremacy laws, also the clause, like Santa, known as preemption. The Constitution, federal laws, and treaties are supreme. State courts are bound by the supremacy clause. The federal law is supreme over state and local law. This has been decided numerous times by the Supreme Court. Early in our history, Martins v. Hunter's Lessee, 1816, McCulloch versus Maryland, 1819, and Gibbons versus Ogden, 1824. And if the Supreme Court is going to be ruling on this again, they're going to say it again. That federal law supersedes state and local law. So federal officials can question and deport individuals. And if you get in their way, state and local officials get in their way, they're violating the law. State and local resistance will get you nowhere, and they're trying. And there's a precedent to this. And the federal government has warned numerous officials in California that they may be in violation of the law. This is called insurrection, or also called nullification, where state and local governments try to nullify the federal law. And I'm going to give you a major example for this scenario and in history. And if the Supreme Court rules on this, they're going to bring this up. They're going to bring up what's happened. This is called the Little Rock Nine. This took place in Little Rock, Arkansas in September of 1957. I remember it. It was on the news. I watched this every night unfolding in most of September of 57. By the way, there's 7 of the 9 Little Rock Nine still alive. Now, we had a Supreme Court case called Brown versus Board of Education in 1954, which called for the desegregation of segregated schools by race in the United States, primarily in the southern part of the United States, meaning that separate but equal was not equal. They had to integrate black and white students. So what happened was the Little Rock School District, that's Little Rock, Arkansas, agreed to desegregate their schools in May of 1955, based upon the Brown decision. So what happened was the segregationists in Arkansas didn't like this, and on September the 4th, 1957, the governor, Orville Fulbus, ordered the Arkansas National Guard to block the entry of the Little Rock Nine. He sent the National Guard to prevent these non-black students from entering Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. So President Eisenhower got interested because he was the president. And remember, federal law supersedes state and local law, and the president is higher up than the governor of Arkansas. And we had the Supreme Court case in Brown versus Board of Education. So Eisenhower wanted to calm things down, and he called Governor Faubus on the phone. He said, look, you got to de-escalate the situation. You got to get rid of the Arkansas National Guard, and you got to let the kids, the Little Rock 9, the 9 students, go into the high school. And he didn't get anywhere. And then the mayor of Little Rock, I think his name was Mayor Mann, he called President Eisenhower. Eisenhower was also known as Ike. And by the way, if you don't know anything about President Eisenhower, he was formerly General Eisenhower. He was the Supreme Allied Commander in the European theater in Europe. He was responsible for our victory over Germany. A very popular individual, and he became president in 1952. You didn't mess with Ike. So what Eisenhower did, again, he didn't mess around. On September 24, 1957, he invoked the Insurrection Act of 1807. He said that the governor and the state of Arkansas were in a state of insurrection. Now we have a law that says you can't use the military. We're not talking about the National Guard, but you can't use the military for domestic reasons. It's called Posse Comitatus Act. However, there's an exception to that, and it's called the Insurrection Act of 1807, where the president can send actual troops, military troops, National Guard or regular military, into a situation where he considers there's an insurrection. And keep in mind, he's under the law and under history, he's totally entitled to do this because the major insurrection was the Civil War. And the major nullification was the Civil War. This has been... So what he did was he sent in the 101st Airborne Division, 1,000 troops, into Little Rock, Arkansas. And he also took over the Arkansas National Guard. And they escorted the Little Rock 9 into Central High School. It is my opinion. By the way, my opinion is, and it's hard to do this in history, but my opinion is if Eisenhower was president today, I think he would immediately invoke the Insurrection Act, particularly what's going on in Chicago, in California, in Portland, in states and local government obstructing the federal enforcement of deportation of individuals. I think Eisenhower would do it. President Trump has said that he's considering it. And I think President Trump has actually shown tremendous amount of restraint by not invoking the Insurrection Act, by trying to work things out with state and local officials, but they don't seem to be cooperating. But Eisenhower, he wouldn't mess around. And you have to understand, even in recent times, the Insurrection Act has been invoked by other presidents. President Johnson in 1967 invoked the Insurrection Act in Detroit because there was a major riot going on. Lots of people were getting killed and injured. And then President Bush the Elder invoked the Insurrection Act in 1992 during the Los Angeles riots concerning the Rodney King trial. So there's precedent for this, and if state and local governments want to obstruct federal officials, just like they did back in 1861 when South Carolina and other southern states decided they would secede from the Union and block federal enforcement of the law. Look, we have history here. We have the law. And I don't know if they're doing this for political reasons or whatever, but it could get messy, and it's very possible President Trump could lose his patience and invoke the Insurrection Act. So now this is Dr. S. I'd like to conclude, just mention that you can watch this podcast on YouTube, Conversations with Dr. S, the legend. Sorry about that. Here we go, and this is my email, and you can comment on anything I might say. I'm interested in feedback. Thank you very much. And again, it's also available in an audio version on Spotify and other formats. It's Conversations with Dr. S, the legend. This is Dr. S, the legend, signing off.